Welcome back. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome to the Symposium on Media and Democracy, where today for the next couple of hours we're going to be talking about the intersection of our media system and our democratic system of governance. Our panel right now is called Where Are the Issues? And what we know from working on media policy change and on independent media is that a lot of people come to our movement because they work on other issues like the environment or women's rights, and it's a constant struggle to get fair, accurate coverage of their issues into the mainstream media and communicate with the citizens and community members that they'd like to reach. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next 50 minutes or so. The intersection of all of the important policy issues that we care about as progressives, and whether or not and how the media covers them and how they often don't. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring up our four expert panelists, and we'll have a conversation for the next hour or so. Whoa, all right. Awesome.
Yeah. We need those. Where are we sitting? Is it anywhere?
Great. Well, welcome. So before we start, I just want to introduce everyone. On our far right on the stage here, we have Heather Smith. She's the Executive Director of Rock the Vote. Heather brings years of experience on mobilizing the youth voter, focusing on their issues. And this year, Rock the Vote has a very ambitious plan to register, is it 2 million voters? Under what age?
18 to 29.
18 to 29, great. We also have Gene Karpinski. He's the president of the League of Conservation Voters. Previously, Gene has 21 years experience as the executive director of the environmental and public interest group US PIRG, and we'd like to welcome you here. Next over here we have Mark Lloyd, who's the VP for Strategic Initiatives at the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Comes with lots of experience from the Center for American Progress, and so he's going to focus on the question of civil rights and coverage in the media. And also here we have David Benaham, who is the founder of the Center for Independent Media, also an author who writes on cyber culture issues for Slate and Wired and New York Times. And so we've got a really great lineup for you. And without any further ado, I think we're going to have Gene make some comments first.
Great to be here. Can you hear me? Wonderful. I appreciate the time. Thanks to you getting up before noon and having a good conversation. We appreciate that. I run LCV, which is a national environmental group, tries to turn environmental values into national priorities. We educate the public. We do accountability. We do an annual scorecard, which rates every member of Congress on environmental issues, and that's their score. Barack Obama has an 86% lifetime score. John McCain has a 24% lifetime score. That was a little commercial on the side. And we also do politics. We do a dirty dozen. We try to elect our friends and defeat our enemies. So that's what we're about in terms of institution. I want to talk about the issue of global warming and how it plays in the media. And just real quick, it's kind of like I look at 4 phases of it. And if you go back maybe 10, 15 years ago, global warming was kind of like where tobacco was maybe 40 years ago, which is, well, there are 2 sides. One set of scientists says it's a problem. Another set of scientists say it's not. And so every kind of conversation, every article, every news interview had to say, scientist A says global warming is a problem. Scientist B says no way. And that was the story the media told, which was outrageous and ridiculous because the vast majority of the scientists, even back then, were saying global warming is real and was serious. But the fair and balanced media always had to go, he said, she said, he said. And for many, many years, we were stuck in that media mindset of balance, one scientist, the other scientist. I'd say probably about 8, 10 years ago, kind of light bulbs started going off, and all of a sudden the press finally woke up. It took a while, clearly far too long, because we're already suffering from this problem. And you finally began to see stories that actually global warming, it's real, it's serious, and it's happening now. And so literally in the last 3 years, the cover of Time magazine, the cover of Newsweek, the cover of Vanity Fair, the cover of Sports Illustrated with a Florida Marlins pitcher waist deep in water talking about global warming. So the mainstream press finally got the issue. Not just he said, she said, but in fact global warming is real. And so for the regular print media, particularly the print media, give them a lot of credit, eventually caught up. And even the electronic media, the question of is global warming a serious problem, we kind of got there. In fact, you even saw, if you watch the last 7.5 years of George Bush, at the beginning he was still in the denier stage. Well, some say this, some say that. By year 6 of his administration, they actually said global warming is real. Now, we don't know what the impacts are. We don't think we're going to do anything about it. Let's do voluntary measures. But, okay, global warming became real. So that was kind of phase 2. we're now in the middle of phases 3 and 4. And from our perspective, we said, okay, we've kind of got to the stage that global warming is a serious problem. But we launched a campaign in January of 2007 saying our goal is to make sure that the candidates talk about this issue. We have the most wide open presidential campaign in 80 years, no incumbent in either party. Let's make this part of the conversation so it becomes a priority issue for the candidates. We did 3 things. We put organizers on the ground in the early voting states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. We figured the primaries would be over by February 5th, and that would be the end of the conversation. So we worked on those 4 states. We were wrong on part of that. But, over 1,000 volunteers asked 250 questions to candidates. What's your position on global warming? What's your plan? And the candidates, candidate after candidate after candidate, all the Democrats, and actually McCain on the Republican side, talked about this all the time. It's a core part of their message. They tied together the energy and the global warming issue. So the candidates got it. We actually organized donors as another part of that strategy for donors to come to candidates and say, you want my money? You want my support? What are you going to do about global warming? So we organized citizens in the early voting states, donors around the country. And our third part of the strategy was try to go after the media. Because we knew the regular mainstream media now got this issue, the environmental reporters. But for the political media, it was still a challenge. And we really, we did our first phase well, grassroots organizing. We organized over 300 donors. But the third strategy, which is organize the media, we really fell short. We actually put up a website called whataretheyWaitingFor.com. And we actually tracked the 5 leading political journalists throughout, starting in January of 2007, actually still current, which is Chris Wallace, Bob Schieffer, Wolf Blitzer, George Stephanopoulos, sorry, and actually it was Tim Russert at the time. And we looked at how many the conversations they had on their Sunday morning talk shows and the debates that they had. There were 20 debates, more than 20 debates over the course of that cycle. And we did a tally at the end of December of 2007. There have been almost 2,300 questions asked of the candidates, and the words global warming or climate change were asked 3 times. So we then actually did a real serious campaign for the next, kind of elevated that, did a video about it, went after them. I think one of the breakthroughs was a Huffington Post piece that Larry David did, highlighting those facts, and kind of went in the face of the political media, because the environmental media got it, political media didn't. In the month of January, there were twice as many questions on global warming as there were in the previous year. So that was a challenge and a strategy. We kind of went right in their faces on it. It was complicated because they get mad at us, but we thought it made sense at that point to go after the political media. And now we're kind of in the 4th stage. We're in the general election. What's it going to be? Who's going to talk about it? And what's made it even more ugly and complicated is now all of a sudden it's everyone's, at least on one side of the aisle, drill here, drill now, drill everywhere. And guess what? That actually has an impact on global warming yet. But have you seen one article talking about the relation between more drilling and global warming? Not yet. That's one of our challenges as we go forward. Thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, Gene. I've been tasked to be the time cop this afternoon, so I'm going to have to move us along. But thank you very much. Mark, we'd like to hear from you next. Where are we at in the state of coverage of civil rights issues in the media, mainstream to local, et cetera?
Well, we really haven't progressed very far from the 1960s, unfortunately. The big challenge that the media face is that they are sort of trapped in the notion that somehow civil rights is the same thing as black people. All Americans have civil rights. The problem of inequality in our country is shared, unfortunately, by young people, by women, by Native Americans, by older Americans, by Americans with disabilities, by a wide range of Americans. Folks are discriminated against, again, not necessarily because of their race, but across a wide range of issues. And so one of the challenges that we face is that the conversation that we have about civil rights is sort of stuck in a framework back in the 1960s that says this is a problem that's really about race. The other challenge that we have is that, frankly, there's this sort of fantasy that we're living in, that we are somehow in a post-racial environment, that maybe because we've got Barack Obama, who might be the next president, that all the problems that folks who are of color face will somehow go away, or that this is a demonstration that those problems really aren't serious anymore. And so one of the big challenges that we face is that even though the media sort of identifies civil rights and race, they really don't cover the incidences of discrimination that are really faced by people of color. around this country. Nor, frankly, do they really cover the incidents of discrimination faced by women in this country, or the fact that there are older people who face discrimination on a regular basis. You almost never see stories about the challenges that older people have when they are being fired from jobs or laid off or having some other problem. One of the other problems is, frankly, that the media focuses on a conflict frame. And we really have a good story to tell. And part of the good story is really the work that we're doing at the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. We are an organization of nearly 200 members, but they include the AARP, the American Associations of People with Disabilities, they include the U.S. Catholic Conference, they include the National Urban League, the NAACP, the National Council of La Raza, a wide variety of organizations, not just people of color, not just black folks, but all Americans who are concerned about inequality in our country. And we have faced, I think, an increasing level of inequality in America. We don't get the sort of coverage about what the impacts of that equality mean and what that means in terms of the opportunities for the next generation, what that means for the challenges that the next president is going to face. And again, the good story is that there is a coalition, a wide variety of organizations working together to shine a light on those challenges, to bring those organizations, even though they may have very different differences, like Human Rights Campaign, the NAACP, the National Council of La Raza, very different sets of agendas, but we can bring them together and figure out a common agenda to move America. Now, this is a good story. This isn't a conflict frame. This isn't a story about black and brown fighting each other. This isn't a story about the fact that you've got older people who will no longer support young people in the same community. This really is a good story. But this is not a story that, frankly, the media is set up to tell. And so I'll just finish with a thank you to the bloggers and thank you for Common Cause. It's very important to be able to have the opportunity to get this good story out and to remind all Americans that there are organizations who are really there fighting for the civil rights of all Americans. And I think with that, with the note that I've been asked to keep it short, I'll end it and look forward to questions.
All right, thank you, Mark. So we're going to turn to Heather. My understanding this is a historic year for youth turnout and youth interest and participation, and are we seeing that story well covered?
Well, the youth vote story is an interesting one in the media. For years, the conventional wisdom, as told by mainstream media, has been that young people are apathetic, that they're disengaged, and that they don't vote. And you can imagine, as a young person, how disempowering that is to be told, you don't vote, and you don't care, and you're disengaged, and you're apathetic. And of course, then, they're not going to show up and go to the polls. They're not going to engage in the political process. And then it's, to me, quite astounding because you end up with a media and a political community that's running a campaign, and they've got all these people. And they say, we're going to campaign to these people, but we're going to ignore them because they're not participating. And then, whoa, totally shocked when these people who we totally ignored didn't show up at the polling booth. And it really fostered this cycle of neglect where they're being ignored. Therefore, young people feel like politics becomes incredibly irrelevant and not personal. The decisions that affect their lives, they don't connect that to the political process. Therefore, then politicians aren't paying attention. And the media has told this story over and over and over. They're apathetic, they don't count. So much so that in 2004, we saw the largest increase in young voter turnout in between two presidential elections ever in the history of 18 to 20-year-olds having the right to cast a ballot. And the AP story that ran the next day, after record margins of increases, was Youth Vote a Bust. That was the headline. Unbelievable. They were so convinced of this frame that when the turnout went up, they fell right back into it, misinterpreting the exit polls and using the share data. So we've worked very, very hard at Rock the Vote to both be the voice of young people in the political process as well as to change this conventional wisdom in the mainstream media. In 2006 and 2008, we've been out there with young people on the ground telling the stories themselves, working with the media, working with new media in particular to get that story out there. And in 2006, we saw record increases in turnout again. And the headline that time was Young Voter Movement at the Polls. So it's starting to change. You're starting to hear about the youth vote. You're starting to hear it in the media a little bit more. But now the new frame that we're seeing played out is Barack Obama created youth vote movement. As if by throwing his hat in the ring, suddenly a movement emerges. And we all know that social change movements are built by hard, strategic work on the ground. They take years and years. And there is an incredible movement of youth voting groups who have been working strategically and diligently with very little money for nearly a decade, laying the groundwork for this increased engagement that you're seeing happening right now. And when a candidate, a politician, and the media start paying attention to them, politics becomes relevant. You start to reverse that cycle. So while the news is starting to tell the story of the youth vote, I still think there's a lot of work for us to do to tell the story of the young voter movement that's happening. And at Rock the Vote, we have 2.5 million members on the ground right now organizing voter registration drives in their communities. This is 18 years in the making. We've got 31 coalition partners doing the same. And so I'd like to see the media start to cover that. At Rock the Vote, we have young reporters telling that story, and we'll continue to push that out.
Excellent. Great. Well, we're moving at a good clip, actually, so we might have some time for Q&A, so that's great. We hadn't planned for that, so that's good. I'd like to turn us to David. David is, as I said, the founder of the Center for Independent Media, which is a network of online independent news sources in several states: Colorado, Iowa, Minnesota, I'm missing a couple, New Mexico, and Michigan. Thank you. So I'd like to ask you why you started your group and sort of how this network connects to the kind of issues that we're talking about today.
I think there's a common thread on this panel, which is a recognition that the news shapes public opinion in this country. And so whether it's around civil rights or the environment or the role of youth in driving an election and a progressive agenda, there's an appreciation and often a frustration with the fact that the news media still remains a primary connector with the American people through which all this material gets filtered. And if the news media doesn't filter it in a way that advances the issues, that seems to create an obstacle, then we have all these grievances against the news media. But the underlying theme is the idea that the news media shapes public opinion. And so when we created the Center for Independent Media about 2 years ago, the thinking was, let's be the media, right? Thanks to the internet, thanks to the changes in technology, thanks to the changes in consumer behavior in terms of who gets their news from where, we could potentially create a news network on our own and have it be online that addresses all the key issues we care about. And let's focus it into local communities where actually these issues are driving public debate with an eye to breaking news, so that what we're doing is not propaganda or spin. We're actually just presenting new information about these issues that are fact-based, that in themselves potentially help drive the conversation. So I'll give you an example. Like last week, our New Mexico site, the New Mexico Independent, we cover all the election-related issues, Secretary of State, everything that has to do with the ballot, the machines and everything else. And so we got a tip that we should investigate the state of the election infrastructure in New Mexico. We had county clerks who came up to us on the record and said 33% of our voting machines are failing today, because the memory cards aren't working properly. And the company that makes these machines wants $100,000 or more per county to fix the cards in time for the election. Now, this is one of the poorest states in America. They don't have money to do this in these counties. The Secretary of State, for a variety of political reasons, doesn't seem interested in really dealing with this issue. And the governor, Bill Richardson, doesn't seem to be solving it either, because he could potentially move some money out of the state budget into these counties to just pay this company to get the machines fixed. So we break this story last week. And think of this as a kind of preventative journalism. It's now 68 days before the election. The story has been broken. And so for those progressive groups and other groups that care about good government, clean elections, this is an opportunity through news to really drive something in New Mexico. 68 days to fix this. That's the role the news media can play in terms of informing the debate, driving the conversation. And what we've done over time is try to merge the speed of the blogs, this infrastructure of blogs, with the discipline of professional journalism. So all of our reporters adhere to a code of ethics, and they do things appropriately as journalists. But this issue of balance is a wonderful distinction, I think, between our work and a lot of the other media. If you're covering global warming as a reporter, part of your duty is to speak to all the experts and actually reach a conclusion in your reporting. That's your job, is to find the truth as a reporter. And so you need to come to a conclusion in your piece. The idea that it's a he said, she said is not acceptable reporting. And I think part of the decline in public confidence in the news media relates to the news media's abject failure in the last 8 years to play its role. It started with, I think, the Whitewater scandal in the late 90s. People were mortified at this absurdity. It went on with Bush v. Gore, which was a catastrophe for the news media, which covered it appallingly. It then continued with the disgrace of the run-up to the war in Iraq, where the news media parroted all the garbage coming out of the White House. You know, they deserved the loss in readership that they have suffered. And they claim it's because of technology that the newspapers are declining 10% a year. That's baloney. It's not because of the internet. It's because people don't like your product. And the rise of the blogs, the rise of a lot of this progressive media is a direct consequence of a bad product. And so we're at a crossroads now. It's a very exciting crossroads, I think, because of this new technology, where there is an opportunity to create a new kind of media, a news media. And we're doing that. Other people are doing that. And so I think a lot of the negative consequences we've seen, there's now a window to potentially really move the ball forward by creating a new kind of media.
There's a lag there. Thank you so much. Everyone was so succinct that I believe that we have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. I'd like to ask our excellent stage management staff if anybody could have a roving mic to take public questions. And but just to get us started while we set that up, Heather, my question to start with you is the news media saying that these young people aren't voting because they're not voting, or is it because they're not watching the 6 o'clock news and subscribe to these, the daily print paper? As young people migrate to mobile platforms, to online platforms, is it about market share and they're not paying attention to young people's habits in terms of media consumption and use? Do you think that's feeding into the lack of understanding of the youth voter movement that you've been describing?
Well, when the news media covers the youth vote, it's usually with, some new technology thing they're figuring out and a story about Obama and a big rally. They're starting to get the turnout story right, which is, yes, they turned out in record numbers in the primaries because it was so hard to avoid because it was so obvious. But now the story is, will they turn out again in November? And for us, of course, the answer is yes. In 2004, if you look at history, 81.6% of all registered voters under 29 cast a ballot. We've registered millions and millions of new young people into this process. Once they're registered, they start to pay more attention. They are smart and savvy. They seek out information, and they will go to the polls. We'll make sure of that, but they will, in fact, go to the polls. The news media, telling them that they may or may not vote, that doesn't necessarily help, but they're also not covering the issues in a way that's relevant to young people, and that doesn't necessarily help. When you talk about health care as an issue in the mainstream media, it's broad-based, or it has to do with elderly health care plans. It's not the fact that 13.3 million 18 to 29-year-olds don't have health care, making them the largest age group of uninsured Americans in our country. When you talk about the war in Iraq, if they do at all, it's about sons and daughters, not brothers and sisters and husbands and wives, people not coming back the same. 80% of the casualties overseas are young people under 30. You're not getting the story in a way that's personal and relevant to someone who's 18 to 29. You are finding that in the new media. You're seeing that less in the mainstream media. But young people are looking to new media for their information right now.
Thank you. So I guess we do have a roving mic. If you can raise your hand, we'll try to get a mic over to you. We have one. Oh, great. She started.
Hi. This is directed towards you, Heather, but maybe for potential collaboration. I was wondering post-election what your plans are to harness and propel this energy forward on the issues. Do you have something like a Rock the Environment tour where people can get together on a large-scale level with all that energy, where you're looking at the issues and entertainers and propelling it forward and giving people action points to keep going so that this energy moves forward with organizations like Gene and other organizations represented here and around the country?
Yeah, that's very important to us at Rock the Vote. It's, voting is not the end all. That's just how we build the political power that we can then leverage for progressive change in our country. And in 1992, which was the first presidential election that Rock the Vote was active in, coming out of that election, which saw huge increases in turnout, They then went to lobby and work on Motor Voter, which was a voting rights initiative, which was quite relevant for Rock the Vote. And coming out of the 2008 elections, we plan to do the same thing. Make sure the media tells that story, that there was record turnout and young people decided the election in 2008, so that we have enough political power and clout to leverage to make real change. And to make this change, we're not a policy institution, but we do have incredible numbers of young people who are active, and we'll work with groups like Genes for those who want to get involved in environmental things and give them the actions to take. For those who want to get more involved in the civil rights movement, for them to give them actions to take. And we will continue to work on voting rights issues, which have always been core to our founding.
So I think we have time for at least 2 questions. Okay, good. Great, thank you. There's a little lag sometimes.
Okay, are we there? All right. A lot of people that are going to be addressing the healthcare and Social Security issues are going to want to drum up the spirit of intergenerational divisiveness. I've seen it in this room with a comedian talking about old people. I've seen it yesterday with daily costs. What I want to know is how you're responding to this, Mark, and what you think we can do to reduce ageism as a social force in our country, which is gaining momentum with Social Security and healthcare issues rising.
Well, this is, as you properly raised, this is an extraordinarily important issue. And as I mentioned before, AARP is a part of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. So we take the issues of ageism very seriously. And again, we really think that it's extraordinarily important to be able to work in coalition with other groups. And one of the things that's sort of unusual to think about is when you think about the National Council of La Raza, which is focused on Latino issues. Well, of course, there are old people in the Latino community. So one of the challenges that we face is that we tend to think of each particular group as not having the concerns of other groups. And so we want to make sure that the folks who are concerned about the rights of the disabled, which very much touch on ageism questions, folks who are concerned about the rights of African Americans and Latinos and Native Americans, that they also understand that ageism is a problem and a question. Part of what we are working on is to make sure that while we reach out to young people, that we respect and we learn from the generation that preceded them, and that we actually pull those groups together to sort of work on common problems. We do have common issues and issues of inequality in our country that are faced by a wide range of groups. And again, I think Martin Luther King probably said it best. I mean, if one of us in our society is having a problem, is affected, then all of us are affected. We are a link in a common chain. And unless we make sure that that chain is strong, then we really as a country are only as strong as our weakest link. And so we need to make sure that we address the problems of ageism, as well as the problems, that the folks in the disability community face and people of color and women face. Yeah, good question. Thank you.
I believe we can take one more very quick question, and we'll wrap up.
Hi, my name is Patrick Ober, and I'm a student at Indiana University. And I was wondering, we have a lot of problems as college students with registering to vote. This can do anything from changing addresses to all that kind of thing. How can we get the media to recognize that part of our apathy may result from the fact that we don't have the proper avenues and the proper information in order to register ourselves to vote? How can we sort of change the perception that we actually need to adjust and modify these voter registration rules and guidelines to make it easier for college students to vote?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly talk to that a little bit. The voter registration process was set up as a barrier to keep people from casting a ballot. And that continues to be the case. Once registered, young people cast ballots at the same rate as all the other voters in the electorate. It's getting registered, which makes it a barrier of entry into the political process. And we find that if we simply ask someone to do it, simplify the registration process, the rates at which they say yes and fill it out are phenomenal. And we know that when we in fact go into other countries and try to set up democracies where we're encouraging participation, we never set up voter registration processes. But in our country we have that. And for young people, it's particularly disenfranchising. So, at Rock the Vote, we are highly in favor of getting out there, spreading the word, convening. We use artists as spokespeople to bring people together to share information about how to walk yourself through that voting process. But I'd rather just get rid of it. I really think it keeps people away from the process because it changes the political landscape, and we see what kind of consequences that has.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you to the audience for these great questions. I'd like to offer a round of applause for our fine panelists. This afternoon, we're going to make a quick transition to our second panel for the afternoon.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
I can't ride.